Hi everyone, it's Plesky P here, coming in from Melbourne, Australia. I have Daniel Coston with me, and it gives us great pleasure to have Ethan Russell with us. How are you today, Ethan?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you.
Now, I just want to ask you, with the success of your photographs and the Get Back book being a #1 seller all over the world, how gratifying is it now, from 1969, your photos are used in the book with Linda McCartney's, and it's a fantastic worldwide seller.
Well, I found that out from you. You know, I didn't know how it was selling. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad it's out there. The whole experience of having it be the biggest thing in the world in 1969 and the biggest thing in the world in 2000, whatever we are, 22. That's an interesting thing. And it's coming to people that didn't know. But the Beatles, why the Beatles last as long as they have is they just have. I mean, that's really the end of that story. And it's incredible to see it happen again. I don't have I'm glad it's out there. I'm glad people are having the experience,
That's really great. But what I want to know is, with the book, you must have had this sense, like in 1969, to be there for Let It Be, alongside Michael Lindsay Hogg, coming in and out, taking photos, then being on the roof. I mean, what a total experience. But what I really want to know is, from the rooftop to when you did the last Beatles photographic session in Twickenham Park, did you have the sense that the Beatles were breaking up because of tensions?
Well, you can see it in the movie. That's one of the great things about the Get Back movie, is this experience that I had, now everybody has, more or less, right? And so you don't have to sort of read between the lines so much. You can kind of see it in front of you. Did I know? The last session was not a bunch of happy people, that's for sure. And part of what works with my photography is I don't change stuff. I don't try and change stuff. So they look like they're having a horrible time. And they weren't having a good time. George, I don't think, smiled for the entire session, the entire day. I didn't see him smile once. So that was kind of the real feeling of it. I would feel bad about that sometimes, and that would get myself in trouble photographically, because people would want me to tell them what to do, and I never would, right? And because it felt too weird. I mean, why am I telling the Beatles what to do, right? But the net of it is, you can see the pain, and people weren't happy. John was out of there. Paul was there. It wasn't fun. And yet, interestingly, I did this one shot where I sort of thought, well, I'm going to tell them what to do, right? And this is weird to me even today. And I don't know what it was, but it was kind of like what they did for Magical Mystery Tour. It was kind of like the 4 people lined up and, doing a high step. And it was like weird, right? But the thing that's interesting to me is that they did it, right? They had such a depth of experience of doing that. Lennon was all over that later in his life, about the stuff that, as much as they were adored and thought of as revolutionary and all the rest of that, John from the inside went, we did some pretty sellout stuff, and I think they viewed it that way. I didn't. They constantly were in this place where they were too big for me to imagine that they could make a mistake. And there was a lesson in that, right? But that's the way I looked at them. How could the Beatles make a mistake? How's that possible, right? But I don't think that's what it looked like from the inside, looking out.
For me, going back to Get Back / Let It Be, they originally offered you a day, I believe. Your book, Dear Mr. Fantasy, was a big influence on me growing up in terms of knowing the business of rock and roll photography. And you said that they had offered you a day, and you said, no, I want 3.
I don't know where it comes from. I have no idea. If I think about it today, I think that's insane, right? But I said that, and that was the right thing to say, because that gave me enough material for when they came back and saw him again to understand what I was doing, right? And all of that stuff, I mean, it was such a different world. It's not like today where they're going to give you 8 minutes in this corner, which is the extension of that same idea. You don't get anything. It's a complete bullshit control thing that serves nobody. Right.
Correct.
Except potentially the people who are trying to control merchandising. And I don't think it serves them. anyway, so I said that, but I don't know where I got it from, you know.
Well, I've always said the camera kind of galvanizes you and gives you confidence that you may not have if it wasn't in your hands. I've certainly found that in my life. And do you know how many days you end up doing on the Get Back sessions?
You know, including just through the roof, basically, right? Not including the last session, right? I'm going to say like 13 days, but I'm not totally convinced of that number, but they were in and out of Apple. It's interesting, you know, in the Peter Jackson movie, the second day of shooting, where he sings Let It Be, where he does the ballads, where it's downstairs and it's dark, it's not in the movie. There's like 9 hours. And Let It Be is not performed as it was performed for the companion piece to the rooftop concert.
Where'd it go? It's a good question.
Wow. Right. Why not? I mean, one thinks, not to second guess anything anybody did, you know, it was such a big project, and there's no second guessing Peter Jackson, certainly. But I think it's down to show business. It ended on this really high note,
yeah.
Right? And so it's sort of like, okay, we're gonna wave and say goodbye now. But all of that footage for all of the 8.5 hours, that footage isn't in it.
I got to say, with Michael Lindsay Hogg, to me, the man is a genius to get everything down in 1969 so that Peter Jackson can do what he's done now in 2021, 22. And I mean, when the Beatle fans now saw this 3-part series documentary, I mean, it was a lot to take in, but if you're a true Beatles fan, it's no problem. They loved it. And it's actually turned out now to be one of the greatest documentary. And as I said, I think Michael Lindsay Hogg was like a Cecil B. DeMille to be able to get everything down so this was possible now in the future.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of, you know, squabbling, or, you know, a lot of squabbling, which I didn't think Michael was made the fall guy, right? And I thought that's nonsense. That's just nonsense, right? But that's the way it was for a long time. And then, you know, and then Jackson comes in and saves it. Jackson doesn't say this. That's the important part to notice. Jackson doesn't say he saved it. Jackson said what Michael did was incredible, right? I mean, Jackson had a technology that didn't exist. He had the ability to think about making something which would have been unheard of. Michael was making a cinematic release. It's gonna be 75 minutes, right? I mean, nothing. I mean, it was completely formless. Nobody knew what I mean, it's fascinating to see it again, but you certainly can't point a finger at Michael and say he didn't succeed. Without Michael, there's no Get Back.
That's right. But you know, the great thing now that I really got to explain that a lot of people don't get, they didn't have Michael's problems in 1969. Michael was dealing with the Beatles that were imploding inside, and Michael had to organize everything in such a way that he was a pioneer to do it the way he did, to have the foresight to film, to get everything on audio. Peter Jackson didn't inherit the problems from 1969.
Well, but Peter Jackson had to write the software that lets you get the vocal out of because the mic's just there, and then John's going to hit his guitar, and that's going to drown out everything. And so Peter Jackson wrote, if what I read is correct, wrote the software to extract the audio. So all of them need each other. That's as simple as that, or it doesn't exist, right? I mean, Peter Jackson, without Peter Jackson, he was when I first heard he was doing this, because I'm a Peter Jackson fan going right back. My gag was, you know, if I was George Lucas, I'd kill myself. It was like, you know, I mean, really, it just took such a leap, you know. And and then They Shall Not Grow. Did you see that movie, They Shall Not Grow Old?
Yeah.
That's
amazing.
Peter Jackson's movie about the First World War, where the Imperial War Museum gave him all the footage and said, you take it, right? And for the first time in your life, you're seeing somebody that was walking down a trench that was moving like a human being, not like a stick figure, right? So his capacity to do stuff like that is unbelievable. So it's perfect that he showed up for this. It really was gratuitous. Right?
Yeah. It literally, for me, is a film 52 years in the making. It just literally took 52. Yeah,
totally.
Took 52 years to tell this story, which is kind of amazing in retrospect.
Right. And if you're sort of Albert Einstein about this, what you get is that the movement is part of the picture. You know, the time that passed, it's not just it was here and then it was finished here, it's everything that happened in between. It's how we changed, it's how they changed, it's how the world changed, right? And you know, when I watched the second part, I watched the whole thing, of course, and I bought a 70-inch television, so I was like, had friends sitting there with me. I was like, it sounded better in my living room than it ever sounded in theater. You know, that's true, right? It looked better than it ever looked, right? So it was just everything about it took advantage of what happened in between, but there's no real comparing it in a funny way. It's sort of like saying, okay, you get to start your career with like a half frame camera, right?
Yeah.
You know, and then you comes out here and you've got this, which, you know, you can take a 16 or you can take a 30 by 40 with this, right?
Yeah,
So
amazing.
it's just.
Ethan, I'm going to ask you, are you going to go and see it on IMAX? Because you know it's going to be released on IMAX
Probably,
cinemas.
you know, yeah, I'll see it, right? Well, why wouldn't you, right?
Hey,
That's the thing about those guys.
I hope they
just
give
keep
you.
coming.
I hope they give you a free ticket to go and see.
I don't
the
ask
movie.
for nothing free. I have found that's a good place to be.
Mm.
You know?
Ethan, one of the things I really enjoyed in seeing you in the Get Back film is you working around the Beatles. And for years, I was influenced by the close-ups that you did in that book and now this new book. And I tended to use more portrait lenses or zoom lenses to get that closeness. To see you right up on the Beatles with a 50mm lens was like, oh, that's how he did it. You know, it's like
Well,
there's a.
no, but most of what I shot was 105, to be
Okay.
tricky about it. I shot a lot of 105 because it was perfect for that. Didn't shoot zooms because I was as close to an amateur as you could be without being an amateur. And I read that zoom lenses were softer, which I think
Some can be.
was
Yeah.
true. Some people believe. So I didn't shoot zoom lenses. I didn't have any zoom lenses. So I only shot primes, which turns out to be great. And I shot the 105 1.2, which was a spectacular lens for that. You know.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. I used a similar lens for years and enjoyed it. And one thing I will also, there's a purity in the 50mm lens that I think comes through in a lot of your work. And you were shooting mostly color slide for.
Well, I didn't shoot to do this. I hardly ever shot the 50. I found the 50 was the hardest lens for me to use. Right.
Oh wow.
Because this is very techy for your audience, but still, I see the 105. You know what? If you really look at what your eyes are doing, they're here to here, right? You know, but you think you're looking at that. It's just all tricks that your brain is playing on you, right? You put the longer lens on and it tends to look more like that. It tends to look more like what you think you're looking at, right? And so I like it for that reason, because it gives that feel, a little bit of compression. The wider end lens, though, which is 24 is what I use the most, right?
Okay.
The 24 gives you the best sense of my normal sense of what my eye can see. So those were my principal lenses, right?
Okay.
That's great. Now, Ethan, I've got to ask you, moving a little bit forward, you did a film of John Lennon and Yoko 1 week before John was killed, right, in Central Park. I want to know now, if you go back to that time in 1980, what was it like doing that in Central Park, that video with them? I mean, it must have been like, you know, they're on top of the world. And then this tragedy happens. But I mean, to have got them on film, how amazing was that?
Well, the reality was, I hate to burst any bubbles, but the reality was a pain in the ass because you know, what had happened. So you got the record company over here that's fighting with Yoko, right? And you got David Geffen sitting here. He's in between the record company, Warner Brothers, and them. And Yoko, and I didn't appreciate it. I sometimes feel ungracious about it, but Yoko had us fly in to do the shoot and then must have canceled it 6 times. Well, I'm not wild about that. And as I've gotten older, I'm a little bit more sympathetic with it. She had a lot on her plate. She had a lot to do. She had a new record coming out. So this little film crew that came in to film it was not super high on our list. So it took she canceled 4 or 5 times before we ever shot anything. And so that doesn't feel great, right? But that said, and I never saw him, right? He was never around. I didn't see him till the day of the shoot, right? And he was fabulous. He was spectacular. And I read afterwards, because I read interviews that they did before I showed up, that they were very excited that I was coming, which was impossible for me to imagine they would feel that way, but apparently they did. I think it led back to them having a sense of nostalgia about 68, you know, which is when we really met, because I met them when they were falling in love. And that time for them, of course, anybody falling in love, they were great, right? And so I think there was a sense of that. But now they're, you know, now they're ensconced in the Dakotas, and it's got all of that energy going on. They finally came out, and we made that up on the spot. It's just like, oh, well, that's pretty. Why don't you walk along there? The truth of it, and then we went downtown and shot in a gallery, stuff you don't see too much, but they're naked in bed. And I sort of feel, I wish I could have done a better job and just realized what was in front of the camera was all that needed to be there, right? No matter what it was, and relaxed, frankly, but I was fairly uptight. He was completely relaxed. You know, there was a moment in shooting in the park where there's like some workers, and they're on the other side of a cyclone fence, right? And they see John, one of them in particular, sees John and comes screaming towards him, right? And throws himself against the fence. It's exactly like being on the other side of the fence in the zoo, right? And they're just losing it. John, I mean, I remember he's John Lennon, John fucking Lennon, John, can you fucking, but John fucking Lennon, that's all that's going on. And John's just walking, you know, he knows this, you know? And so he's like nice enough about it, doesn't react to it particularly one way or another. His ability to be sort of present and calm because of being used, I think you probably have encountered this yourself. I've seen pictures of you guys. You know, those guys are so big and have been so big for so long that they can just kind of walk through everything. And John was, and that's what it was like. And that was phenomenal. And we went, you know, we went downtown and did the shooting down there. And I went back, I was doing something else and got a call from the editor asking me if I'd heard. And I said, heard what? And she said, they shot John, right? That's how I heard about it. And, you know, and then for me, because for me, I mean, you know, John was as big as they get. I mean, I was, you know, there's a Paul camp, there's a John camp. I'm in the John camp. I mean, I'm in the Beatles camp because you need all of them, right? But I mean, I look like him. I was a mini John clone, you know. So, so it was, and I was always impressed with him. He was the, you know, he was the wittiest. He was the fastest. I'm pretty heady, and so we had all that, and he was, so it was great. But it had that, all that real world stuff was there, you know.
I love the story you told in your book about you went back and asked for a picture with him, because which is a picture you didn't get to take with the Beatles in '69. His response to me was just stunning. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah,
I mean, his, because I would never be in people's faces when I was working with them, Stones, Beatles, Who, and Pete Townsend would say, tell us what to do, tell us what to do, you know, and I would be, I don't do that, right? And it was partly shyness, whatever it was, I don't do that. And so, and another thing I never did was get pictures with them. I didn't go, hi, you know, can I have a picture with you, Mick, Keith? You know, I just didn't do it, right? And so I never had a picture of me and the Beatles. Could have got it. They would have done it, right? But I never did it, right? And so by the time, you know, so now we're 1980, I guess, and I'm with John, and I think I'd like a picture with you. And John had this line, and I totally agree with you. It's just a killer line. The line was, sure, you should hang on to your memories. They're all you've got. It was just such a line. You know? Yeah, I have a live show I do, and it's my outline. It's what I close with.
It's lines like that made me a photographer, quite frankly.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Ethan, I want to get onto your fantastic book, right? Ethan Russell Photographs. If you'd be kind enough to hold that book up. What a fantastic book. Everyone's got to go out and buy this. Now, look, to be there and get photos of some of the greatest rock stars of all time, to me, it's amazing. And I have to touch on Linda Ronstadt, the Stones, and the Who. If you can start off with Linda Ronstadt for me, I mean, I'm such a big fan of hers. How great was that?
You know, I like classy people, you know, and she's classy, she has it. She's always got it. You can tell. She was charming. She was low key. She did her job. She had humility. It was unbelievable. And so I'm not alone in loving Linda Ronstadt. Trust me. And so working with her was delightful. It couldn't have been more straightforward. I did two things with her. One was a little, I did more than that, but the two covers I did, the first one was sort of a studio shot, and I like it, and most everybody hated it, but I like it. And then Hasten Down the Wind was a complete accident. That was just happened, right? By that point I was working in LA and kind of becoming a photographer that took jobs and went out and did them. And as opposed to somebody who was hanging out with a band, if you will. And so that's what the Linda sister, she was living in Malibu, and we went out there, waited for Sunday. And I had this sort of, it was not uncommon at the time, but this mixture of sort of flash with, when the sun's going down and you have a variety of things going on that can make it pretty magical. But this horse was not planned. Horse was just running down the beach. And at some point, a friend of mine, Neil Preston, you probably know who Neil is. Neil is doing a thing with other photographers where they're sort of, doing their outtakes as kind of a thing. And it's nice. And he wants me to be part of it. I don't have outtakes though. They're any good, right? So I can't really be part of it. But the shot right before Linda is doing that is, she just looks like, because she's basically saying, don't shoot, you'll scare the horse. She thinks this is horrible. And I grew up with horses. I wasn't going to scare a horse. So, and in any event, I wasn't going to, if I could get it, I didn't know what I could get, but it looked like something I should try and get. So I did, and that's what happened on that one. But I love her. And I went to see her, last time I went to see her, she was doing her talk, and she was in a chair and she couldn't move. But there's nothing that woman ever did that I'm aware of that wasn't classy. People tried to exploit her. She was just always on the money. She's fabulous, Roseanne Cash. I feel the same way about Roseanne Cash. Similar kind of person.
Same. I love Roseanne's sense of prose, which she totally got from her father, which I've told her.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And and so people like that, to me, that's when I love it. I'm not a big entertainment business person.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that. What I like is when you're standing
business
there taking a photo of Janis Joplin on the stage, right? Like those things don't happen, and she's looking at you like, who are you, right? Like, to me, that's a classic shot. And I'm just saying, the Doors as well, Jim Morrison. I can't understand. You're there at the Eye of the Tiger taking these great photos of the biggest celebrities in the world without even trying.
It's about the world being different. I was this kid. I walked into the Albert Hall. The Albert Hall to me is like, Americans, for me, get most of their geography from song lyrics. So when I went to London, it was like, okay, St. John's Wood, I've heard of that. Sunny South Kensington, I've heard of that. Albert Hall, I've heard of that. And so I lived there for a while. I got to know what they were. I walked into the Albert Hall. It was 69. I had a camera with me. Nobody asked me what I was doing there. I went on the stage. Nobody asked me what I was doing there, right? Except clearly, Janis Joplin didn't think I should be there. You can tell it, I wonder what that was. I thought it's exactly what you called. It was like, who the fuck are you, right? But I was on the stage, and that's all about different world. It's as simple as that, Not possible for anybody anymore,
And I also think
Doors was boring, but they just, Jim Morrison was boring in my encounters with him, right? If he didn't die, in Paris, I don't mean to be too rough, but if he didn't die in Paris, he wasn't gonna last long. There would, you could tell. This is, I don't know where he lies in the sort of, line of people dying, right? But pretty early on, I think, Brian's first for me, right? But he was, I don't know if he was overwhelmed. I don't know if he had a bad day. I don't know if it was a shitty flight across the Atlantic, but, he just was surly, basically, the entire time. I think that's a fair way to put it, right?
I got to ask you about Brian from the Rolling Stones, because I've seen your photos and you're at Crotchford Farm. That's right, taking all these photos.
Right.
I mean, how amazing is that? That you're there taking photos of Brian at the right time. When I'm in the right time, you're there, part of history, and then Brian dies. I mean, like, not that you're looking for timing, but to take those photos is unbelievable that you're there to record history.
Well, yes. I mean, Brian's the one that's responsible for doing all the acting out, right? Again, I don't tell him what to do. So I show up, Brian's hungover, I think. I don't know. He's not awake yet, that's for sure. And I get there, I think it's midday, and I get there. And so I start shooting because what do you do? So here, sit here, right? And so he sits there, he's bored to death. He hates it, right? The thing about him is that he got that the acting out worked, right? For who he was, right? And so he just leaves me. I don't tell him what to do. He goes upstairs, he puts on this American flag shirt, grabs a gun, right? And starts threatening me with a gun. Now, so the real world stuff is, I'm an American, I know what a gun is, right? You know, it's like I'm an American, I know what a Hell's Angel is, right? You know, the English didn't know, right? So this gun that he's threatening me is a pellet gun, right? It's not like it's not nothing, but it's nothing, right? And so he's playing with it. I'm excited because I think it's cool, because I want to take, you know, far out Rolling Stone pictures like everybody else does, right? So he's doing all the work for me, so I'm taking the picture. There's one shot from that, it's not in my book, it's in Dear Mr. Fantasy though, where it's a close-up like this of him, right? And he looks 45 if he's a day. He's just gone already. And I didn't know that. I didn't know. It took a long time for me to know, to spot that the way I can spot people that are on their way out now in a half a second, because there's so many of them, right? I didn't know what that was. He still, you know, he still was Brian Jones. He was fabulous, right? But he, you know, he wasn't. And anybody, and over time, then anybody who talked to knows he couldn't show up. You couldn't count on him. You know, he couldn't perform. Yeah, that's from that session. That's right. And the little one next to it, the tiny one in the corner, is the shot of him looking 45, right? He's 20, how old is he? 26?
26, 27. Yeah.
In there. And he's just gone. I mean, he's gone. And that's just, you know, and his liver was shot, everything was shot. It's sad, really sad, right? But that didn't know, first person, didn't know that was going to become what happened to a lot of people. I was looking this up. It sounds weird, but you know, we all had this sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and I wish they just kind of took the drugs out of that sentence, right? Sex and rock and roll is plenty,
yeah,
right? You know, and it gets into the, you know, Ian Drury, turns out, I just looked this up, Ian Drury, English singer, is the one that has the single with it. It actually existed prior to that. But the damage that did, because to be cool, you had to be a drugger, right? And drugs took so many people out, right? So just sex and rock and roll. That works, you know?
One of the things I really do like about your work through the years is that you're working with the Beatles and the Stones, and you know, you were still a learning photographer through that first year you're working with the Beatles and the Stones, but you were just, it's almost like you were not overwhelmed by the moment. You were there in the moment trying to capture it. And I always say, as a photographer, that's the best thing you can do. You're there. If you're in that moment, you're supposed to be there. Don't think about it. Go document it. Well, and that's when
yeah. I mean, I learned all this after the fact, you know, because, you know, I didn't have a lot of choices. It wasn't like when I showed up at Twickenham, which, first of all, I knew all the people there. So that was part of the craziness of it. You know, I worked with Michael in the Rock and Roll Circus. I knew Michael was down there. I knew Tony Richmond was down. I knew Glenn was down there. I knew where they were, so I drove down there. Neil Ashmore told me I couldn't go, right? So, you know, so I ignored him, right? And I drove down just to see my friends. I didn't go down to take pictures of the Beatles, right? I thought, this is cool, I'm gonna go down. And then he showed up. That's when that moment occurs where it's like, you can only come down for a day, and I say I won't, right? But that's why I'm just there, right? And so, but it wasn't like I said, well, should I shoot this with my Hasselblad, my, you know, view camera, or my Nikon? I only knew how to use one camera, right? So those kind of choices weren't really in front of me, right? So once you're there, though, because to me, the story I tell is a true story, because I didn't train to be a photographer. I didn't want to be a photographer. It wasn't something I was thinking about, right? And yet I had certain chops from the minute I picked them up. Like some people, I think, can pick up a guitar and they can recognize when a note's in tune. And if it's not in tune, they can figure out how to put it in tune. I can't do that. I tried to do that a lot. I can't do it, right? I can frame a shot without thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
Just happens, right? And
Yeah.
so I thought, well, where the hell did that come from? And the memory was that I was on my parents' ranch, and I was a little hunter because my grandmother said, you got to shoot the blue jays, right? And so it was like, okay, so how do you shoot a blue jay? You can't walk up and talk.
Yeah.
You can't do any of that. You got to be quiet. You got to pay attention. You got to really focus, and you get one chance, right? And that's how I shot. This is how I shot, right? So that really works. And I'm not, you know, I'm just trying to do that, right? And the rest. So what I learned years later, as show business basically ripped the soul out of people, out of real photography, right? Which, you know, it just did. They want product photography, right? You know, so what I learned was that, so then you, I'm sure you've been there, and me, it's like, well, let's do a photo shoot. So I have an obscene sentence like, what the fuck is a photo shoot? What is that? It's people standing around having somebody take their picture. What is that? Right? There's nothing real about that in a million years of Sundays, right? So I learned that what you want, if you can do it, is to get people engaged in something that engages them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was around people that were engaged in making music, right? So I was around people that were doing, and they weren't paying any attention to me, nor should they. That let me do what I do and them do what they do. And I also think that photo shoots, unless you're one of those people that wants to be a star because you want to be a star, right? That you're not interested in your art, you're interested in being a star, right? So then all that stuff matters to you. But if that's not your primary motivation, then it's as much big a pain in the ass for them as it is for us, right? I think, you know, so, you know, all after the fact, I didn't know any of this when I was doing it, right? But that's what I ended up with.
I just want to say something if I can now, Ethan, as we wrap this up. It's been a fascinating interview. You're a man, as I said, one at forefront of photography, at film. And you know what? You've made this great body of work, and I want everyone out there to go and buy the Ethan Russell photography book. Also, while you're buying that, get on the net and order the Get Back book as well.
Right. Well, it's all EthanRussell.com. You don't get this at Amazon. You want this book? You got to get it from me, right? So
tell them the link.
That's a lot of stories about that. What?
Tell them the links again if you can.
Oh, www.ethanrussell.com. Simplified it over the years.
Well, I want to say, Ethan, it's been fascinating talking to you.
So,
Right, and everyone stay tuned for some great people coming on the Plastic EP live TV show. And I want to say a big hello to Michael Lindsay. We love you out there.
I'll tell you. I'll tell him. And thank you for joining. Thank you.
And Ethan, thank you for being someone that changed my life for the better. So thank you for making me want to be a photographer.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Thank you.